Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you all know, we're in a period of lockdown at the moment, and we're all looking for things to do to occupy our time. And many of us have used this time to maybe acquire new skills or go back and rediscover old skills. Some of us are learning how to knit, how to sew, how to do all sorts of different things around the house. And some of us are using this time to work on our language skills. And this is something that I'm doing. I'm working very hard on German. I'm trying to add German as a passive language. But I'm also working on a language that I learned in the past, which is the Irish language. And I rediscovered the Irish language thanks to my friend Andrea, who recommended a MOOC, a massive open online course, one of these free online courses that you can do. And I've actually been doing one of these courses through an Irish university. And it's really good. It's a very good course. It's very well designed. It's interactive. It's fun. And it got me thinking, why didn't I do this before? Why didn't I go back to learning Irish before? I did it for 3 years at school. And I didn't particularly enjoy it at the time, I have to say. But going back to it now, I've actually got a lot of pleasure out of learning the language. And it also got me thinking, why don't more people in Ireland speak Irish? And why is it that we have this slightly complicated relationship with our native language? And that's what I'm going to explore in this speech. But before going into the complex relationship, I'll just start by giving you some facts and figures about the Irish language. So first of all, some people refer to Irish as Gaelic. I think that's a fairly clear sign that someone is not from Ireland. People from Ireland refer to the Irish language as Irish. And the Irish language is very different to English. That's another misconception. People sometimes think that Irish is just the way that Irish people speak English. But that's not the case. There's Irish English, there's Hibernian English, you could call it. But the Irish language is a completely separate language, and it's a Celtic language. And the Celtic languages belong to two main groups. You have the Brittonic languages, so they are languages like Welsh, Breton, Cornish, and then you have the insular languages. So this is Irish and Scottish Gaelic as they call it, and Manx. Manx is a language which is spoken on the Isle of Man, which is an island between Ireland and Great Britain. So in Ireland, the Irish language is the national and official language of the Republic of Ireland, so the independent part of Ireland. And it's also considered to be a regional or minority language in Northern Ireland. And since 2007, it's been an official language of the European Union. I'll come back to that a little bit later, perhaps towards the end of my speech. So who actually speaks Irish? Well, it's spoken as a first language by about 140,000 people. The population of Ireland is around 5 million. So it's quite a small number of people who actually speak the language as their first language. And these speakers are mainly found in the so-called Gaeltacht areas. So Gaeltacht means Irish speaking. So there are Irish speaking areas on the west coast, right from the northwest to the southwest, in the provinces of Ulster, Connacht, and Munster. And then a further 1.7 million people speak the language as a second language. So these are native English speakers who have learnt Irish at school, for example, or at university. And it's a language which is widely taught in schools. It's compulsory for 14 years in the Republic of Ireland. You have to do it for 7 years at primary school and 7 years at secondary school. In Northern Ireland, it's not compulsory, but I went to a Catholic all-boys school, and there it was compulsory for 3 years at my school. But it's not put in place by the government. The government doesn't say, oh, you have to learn Irish, unlike the government in the Republic of Ireland. So in the Republic of Ireland, all signposts are in both English and Irish. All laws and official documents have to be translated into Irish. And there's simultaneous interpretation at the Irish Parliament, for example. So all of this sounds very good. The Irish language has a a very prominent role in Irish life, at least on paper. But in reality, it's not the case at all. And there are a number of reasons why the Irish language has struggled over the years. And I'll talk about probably about 5 of these reasons. So first of all, the main problem, if you can call it that, is the English language. I'm not going to go into the whole history of Anglo-Irish relations. It's a very long and complicated story, and you'll probably have heard about the English occupation of Ireland, maybe something like the potato famine. And these were all very important steps in the decline of Irish. But let's focus on the present. In the present, English is a world language. It's a very important language. Everyone wants to learn English. And native English speakers are at an advantage on the job market. For example, if you're a native English speaker, you probably have better job prospects. It's also helped turn Ireland into an attractive destination for inward investment. And as we all know, and speaking as a native English speaker myself, native English speakers are quite lazy when it comes to foreign languages. So if we can get by with just learning English, just speaking English, then why bother learning any other languages? And at this point, maybe I should point out that Irish is not considered a foreign language in Ireland. So you need to be very careful with the terminology. You can't say, that Irish is a foreign language, because it is the official language of Ireland. So we usually refer to it as a second language instead of a foreign language. And then there's a second point, which is that the Irish language is a complex language. The word order is quite different to English, for example. In English, we have a so-called SVO word order, so subject, verb, object. Irish is a VSO language, so a verb, subject, object. So instead of saying, I see the man, you would say, see I the man, for example. The pronunciation is difficult. If you look at the spelling of my name, which is a very Irish name, you'll see that it's difficult. So we often have lots of vowels together. There are certain grammar rules about words changing if there's a preposition beforehand. So the first letter of the word might change if there's a preposition before it. It may change if there's a definite article. So there are these very complicated rules of elision and lenition, which is all to do with letter changes. And they're quite rare in Western European languages. I think Swedish has some elision and lenition, and I also believe Turkish has quite a lot of this phenomenon. So there are a lot of rules, a lot of grammar rules. But something that I've found when revising Irish is that the rules are very consistent. So it reminds me a little bit of learning German. There are lots and lots of grammar rules, but the rules can be applied quite consistently. It's not like English, for example, where there aren't so many rules and there are loads of exceptions. So it's a difficult language to learn, but once you've actually got a grasp of the grammar rules, then you can apply them quite easily. Now, my next point comes very much from a Northern Irish perspective. As I told you, I'm from Northern Ireland. And in Northern Ireland, the Irish language is often associated with republicanism. Now, republicanism, some of you may be familiar with republicanism in the United States, like the Republican Party. It's completely different in Northern Ireland. Republicanism means wanting the island of Ireland to be reunited. And this in the past led to violence. There was a terrorist organization, the Irish Republican Army. And often in Northern Ireland, when there were signs or if the IRA ever made statements, they would use the Irish language. So for many people in Northern Ireland, on both sides of the political divide, the Irish language is associated with a degree of terrorism, and it sort of harks back to the past, a past that we don't want to remember, particularly that we want to move on from. And in Northern Ireland, it's often used, the Irish language is often used as a bit of a political football. It's the people who want the reunification of Ireland say, oh yes, we need an Irish Language Act. We need everything to be translated into Irish. We need simultaneous interpretation in the Northern Irish Assembly. And this has created a lot of conflict, a lot of resentment from people who don't speak the Irish language, who aren't particularly interested in the Irish language. They say, oh, it's just a way to get more money from the government. The government will have to fund all of that, and it takes money away from other things. So it's hard, it's a difficult topic, really. And then in the Republic of Ireland, moving on to my next point, there's a completely different way of looking at things. In Northern Ireland, it's to do with the past, it's to do with republicanism, it's to do with terrorism. In the Republic of Ireland, the Irish language is actually associated with the middle class, with the educated middle class. And it's a way of improving your social status, in a sense. If you send your children to an Irish language school, you're sort of saying, I don't want my children hanging around with poor working class children. So only middle class parents send their children to Irish schools because they're considered to be better, in a sense. And it's also a way of dividing not only the rich from the poor, but also dividing native Irish people from migrants. So since the kind of mid-2000s, since the European Union expanded to the east, there have been a lot of migrants from Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, who have moved to Ireland. And they want to learn English. They're not particularly interested in learning the Irish language. So these migrants send their children to English-speaking schools. And some people in Ireland, and I've heard this firsthand from some people in Ireland, and I find it quite worrying, they say, oh no, we don't want our children associating with migrants. So I don't know, I'm a little bit worried about that discourse because I think it could lead to xenophobia, it could lead to a form of segregation, which I don't think is good, and it could hamper the integration of migrants in Ireland. There's something else that I find quite frustrating about learning Irish, I have to say, and that's that there's a real emphasis on dialects. So the Irish language is not spoken by many people, as I told you before, probably all in all fewer than 2 million people. And there's a real emphasis on the 3 different dialects. So the Ulster dialect in the north, which is what I learned at school, the Connacht dialect in the west, and the Munster dialect in the southwest. And these 3 dialects are mutually intelligible. You can understand, especially when you read the language written down, you can understand them. The pronunciation is a little bit different, but often people are only taught one dialect. There's no sort of standardization. I'm comparing it with learning German, for example, where there is a standard form of German, Hochdeutsch, and then there are dialects. But at least there's a standard version that you can learn. And there's also a respect of dialects, I think, in the German-speaking world. Whereas I find, as a speaker of the Ulster dialect, or someone who learned the Ulster dialect, we're considered to be the sort of poor relation. We speak the dialect that people don't like, that people find difficult to understand. So it's a little bit frustrating from a learner's perspective that we don't get the respect we deserve, frankly. However, there is some hope on the horizon. These are all challenges, there's all frustrations that we have, but there is a little bit of hope on the horizon with the Irish language. First of all, when I was at school, learning Irish was incredibly boring. It was always hard for our teachers to justify learning, the teaching and learning of Irish. The teaching techniques were just dull. We were learning from a book. You often read literature about poor people in the west of Ireland who suffer. But now, thankfully, modern teaching methods have finally arrived, and Irish is embracing these modern methods. So using, for example, interactive whiteboards, using different types of challenges online, different types of exercises, the use of something like Duolingo. Duolingo actually received a prize in Ireland for offering exercises in Irish and helping revive the language to some degree. There's a vibrant social media scene in the Irish language. So all of this is very, very good, very optimistic, very promising. And then there's also the fact that Irish is an official language of the European Union. I mentioned this earlier on. It's been an official language since 2007. And that means that, in theory, all laws and treaties and all meetings have to be translated or interpreted into Irish. At the moment, there's something called the language derogation, the Irish language derogation. And that means that the Irish government has said, actually, we don't need translation and interpreting into Irish at the moment. But this derogation expires in 2021, so next year. And as a result of that, the European Commission has recruited a number of interpreters with Irish and translators with Irish. So in the future, we could actually be hearing much more Irish, not only on the island of Ireland, but also in the corridors of the EU institutions in Brussels. So hopefully, I hope that the Irish language will continue to exist, that it won't die out. It seems that Irish has embraced the modern world, which is very good. And hopefully it will lead to more language diversity on the island of Ireland and indeed around the world. Thank you very much for your attention.